In 1971, Soviet engineers lit a hole in the ground on fire, expecting it to burn out in a few weeks. It is still burning. 54 years later, that same restlessness runs through everything on this list. There's a lake in Canada that turns into hundreds of different colored pools every summer and never repeats the same pattern twice. There's a cave in Romania that was sealed off for 5.5 million years, running entirely on chemistry instead of sunlight, holding animals that exist nowhere else on Earth. There's a river in the Amazon that boils, dismissed as folklore for nearly 100 years, until one geophysicist followed his own family's stories into the jungle and measured it himself. There's a lake in Tanzania that turns whatever dies in it into stone. And in Antarctica, a glacier that appears to be bleeding, a thick red liquid pouring out of solid ice for over a century. Beneath that same continent, 4 kilometers under the ice, there's a lake that hasn't felt sunlight in 15 million years. That lake is number 1 on this list, and what came up when scientists finally reached it is still rewriting what biology thought it understood. 10 places, every one of them studied, measured, and documented by real research teams, university departments, published journals, named scientists who put their careers on the record. And every one of them still ends with the same 3 words: we do not know. Let's start. Spotted Lake, Canada. Near Osoyoos, British Columbia, there is a lake that spends most of the year looking completely normal. Then summer arrives. The water evaporates, and what's left behind is not a lake anymore. It's hundreds of individual pools, yellow, green, blue, and pink, sitting side by side across the valley floor, like a paint palette poured across the ground. Researchers from the University of British Columbia have documented the lake's mineral content as among the highest concentrations of magnesium sulfate, calcium, and sodium sulfate recorded anywhere in North America. As the water evaporates through the summer heat, each individual pool crystallizes at a slightly different rate, producing a different color depending on its exact mineral composition at the moment it dries. What researchers have not been able to fully predict is the layout. The chemistry stays broadly consistent year after year. The exact shapes and positions of the pools do not. Every summer, a different pattern. The lake has never repeated itself exactly the same way twice. Darvaza gas crater, Turkmenistan. In 1971, a Soviet drilling team searching for natural gas in the Karakum Desert hit a pocket of methane they had not accounted for. The ground beneath their equipment collapsed, opening a crater roughly 70 meters wide. Concerned that the leaking gas could spread toward nearby villages, engineers made a decision that seemed straightforward at the time: burn it off. Geological assessments at the time estimated the fire would exhaust its fuel supply within a matter of weeks. It did not. Later surveys by Turkmenistan's State Geology Agency determined that the crater sits above a significantly larger natural gas reserve than the original drilling team had calculated. The leading explanation for why the fire has never gone out. Nobody has published an exact estimate of how much gas remains underground or how much longer the fire could continue burning. Locals call it the door to hell. At night, visible from kilometers away, it looks less like an industrial accident and more like a wound in the desert that refuses to close. Richat structure, Mauritania. In the Sahara Desert of Mauritania, there's a circular formation 50 kilometers wide, so symmetrical that astronauts aboard the International Space Station have used it as a navigational landmark for decades. For years, geologists working the region assumed it was an impact crater, evidence of a meteorite strike frozen into the landscape. Closer geological surveys, including fieldwork published by researchers at institutions, including the University of Nevada, ruled that out. There's no shattered rock, no melted glass. None of the physical evidence and impact of that scale should leave behind. The current leading explanation is that the structure is a geological dome. Layers of rock pushed upward by pressure from deep within the crust, then worn down by millions of years of erosion into concentric rings, similar to the layers of an onion sliced through the middle. But researchers studying it still can't fully explain the precision. Domes formed this way are rarely this symmetrical, on this scale, anywhere else on the planet. It took satellite photography, decades after the structure was first noted from the ground, for scientists to even grasp its true size. From ground level, it simply looks like desert. Nazca lines, Peru. For 2,000 years, they were essentially invisible from the ground. Massive figures carved into the desert floor of southern Peru. A monkey, a spider, a hummingbird, each one stretching hundreds of meters, fully visible only from the air. The Nazca culture that created them, existing roughly between 500 BCE and 500 CE, had no aircraft. For nearly a century after their formal documentation in the 1920s by Peruvian archaeologist Toribio Mejia Chespe, researchers cataloged roughly 700 of these figures, debating their purpose without resolution. Then, in 2019, a research team led by archaeologist Masato Sakai of Yamagata University in Japan, working with IBM, began scanning the surrounding desert using machine learning trained specifically to detect faint surface patterns invisible to the human eye. Their first published results identified 143 previously unknown figures, doubling the known total almost overnight. By 2023, a follow-up study published in the journal PNAS Nexus reported over 300 additional figures, many verified through direct field surveys. The total number of known Nazca figures has more than doubled in under a decade, and Sakai's team believes thousands more may still be hidden beneath the sand. What the lines were actually made for still has no scholarly consensus. Every year, artificial intelligence finds more of them. The desert is still talking. Researchers are only just learning how to properly listen. Movile Cave, Romania. In 1986, workers surveying land for a planned power plant in Constanța County, Romania drilled into a limestone hillside and broke through into a sealed cavity. What the first researchers to descend quickly realized was that the cave had been isolated from the outside world for approximately 5.5 million years. The air inside was almost unbreathable. Oxygen sat at roughly a third of normal atmospheric levels, while carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide reached concentrations toxic by any surface standard. And the cave was full of life. Studies published by cave biologist Șerban Sârbu of the Emil Racovița Institute of Speleology have documented 48 distinct species living inside Movile. 33 of them exist nowhere else on Earth. Water scorpions, cave-adapted leeches, blind spiders, and a species of centipede found only in this single system. None of it depends on sunlight. The entire food chain runs on bacteria that metabolize hydrogen sulfide and methane, converting raw chemistry directly into usable energy, a process called chemosynthesis. Access today is restricted to a small number of qualified researchers per year, in full protective gear. According to Sârbu's published accounts, unfiltered exposure to the air inside causes headaches and dizziness within minutes, and permanent lung damage if exposure is extended. Whatever these organisms have been quietly becoming, alone, in total darkness, for over 5 million years, they are still becoming it, completely undisturbed by anything on the surface above them. Socotra Island, Yemen. 240 kilometers off the coast of Yemen, there's an island that has been separated from the African mainland for approximately 20 million years, long enough for nearly a third of its entire plant life to exist nowhere else on the planet. Its most recognizable resident is Dracaena cinnabari, the dragon's blood tree, its canopy spreading into a dense, umbrella-shaped crown, and its sap, when the bark is cut, running a deep red. Ancient traders documented the resin as a valuable commodity more than 2,000 years ago. Botanical surveys conducted by the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, along with Yemen's Environment Protection Authority, have catalogued over 800 plant species on the island, roughly 275 of them endemic, growing nowhere else on Earth. Zoological surveys have identified 90 endemic bird species, and nearly half of the island's reptile species exist only here. Ongoing conflict in the region has restricted scientific access since 2015. What remains to be discovered after 20 million years of complete isolation is a question no research team is currently positioned to answer. Blood Falls, Antarctica. In one of the coldest, driest environments on the planet, there's a glacier that appears to be bleeding. A dark red liquid seeps continuously from a fissure in the Taylor Glacier, staining the surrounding white ice. Explorers who first documented it in 1911 assumed the color came from algae. They were wrong. Research published by glaciologists, including Jill McCookie of the University of Tennessee, identified the true source, a pool of ancient seawater, trapped beneath the glacier for roughly 2 million years, extremely rich in iron. When that water finally reaches the surface and comes into contact with oxygen, it oxidizes almost instantly, rusting and turning blood red the moment it's exposed to air. What makes the discovery genuinely significant is what McCookie's team found living inside it. Microbial communities, surviving with no sunlight, almost no oxygen, and near-freezing temperatures, in water that had been sealed off from the rest of the planet for 2 million years. NASA's astrobiology program has since used the site as a working model for how life could potentially persist on ice-covered moons elsewhere in the solar system. Europa and Enceladus among them. A wound in a glacier that has never healed, quietly containing one of the closest things researchers have found to alien biology, right here on Earth. Lake Natron, Tanzania. In the northern Tanzanian Rift Valley, there's a lake that calcifies whatever dies within it. Not metaphorically, physically. The water's pH reaches between 9 and 10.5, alkaline enough to burn human skin on contact. Combined with dissolved minerals leached from the surrounding volcanic geology, the lake functions essentially as a natural embalming solution. Birds, bats, and insects that land here and die harden within days into rigid, lifelike shapes. Wings still extended, eyes still visible. Photographer Nick Brandt documented dozens of these along the shoreline in his 2013 book, Across the Ravaged Land. Each animal preserved mid-motion, as though it had simply frozen in place. And yet, according to research conducted by the Tanzania Wildlife Research Institute, the lake is far from lifeless. Millions of lesser flamingos breed on the salt flats that appear seasonally in its shallows. The exact same extreme chemistry that kills almost everything else, keeping predators away from their young. Life, and the preservation of death, sharing the exact same water. Shanay-Timpishka, Peru. For nearly a century, geologists dismissed reports of it as folklore, a river deep in the central Peruvian Amazon, where the water boiled, where fish that fell in were reportedly cooked almost instantly. Boiling rivers need a heat source, a volcano, a geothermal vent. The nearest active volcano sat over 700 kilometers away. By every standard geological model, this river should not exist. In 2011, geophysicist Andres Russo, then a doctoral student at Southern Methodist University, followed accounts passed down through his own family into the jungle, and found it, measured it. 86 degrees Celsius, just below boiling, along a stretch more than 6 kilometers long, in places 25 meters wide and 6 meters deep. The river was real. The temperature was real. Russo's subsequent research, published in his book, The Boiling River, and in the peer-reviewed journal Nature, confirmed what local communities had reported for generations. The current explanation, still incomplete, is that the water is heated deep underground, rising through fault lines in the Earth's crust, fed by geothermal energy with no volcanic source involved at all. The exact mechanism producing heat this extreme, without a volcano, remains, in Ruzo's own published words, one of the most puzzling geothermal anomalies on the planet. Local communities had known about the river for centuries. Science needed an expedition, a thermometer, and a peer-reviewed paper to catch up. Lake Vostok, Antarctica. 4 kilometers beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, sealed off for approximately 15 million years, there's a lake. Not a small one. Roughly 250 kilometers long, comparable in surface area to Lake Ontario, the largest, deepest, and most isolated of Antarctica's more than 400 known subglacial lakes. Until 2012, no human hand had ever touched its water. Scientists first suspected it existed in the 1970s, when Soviet and British researchers, analyzing airborne radar surveys, noticed an unusual smoothness in the ice above one region of the continent. Evidence that the ice sheet was floating over a large body of liquid water. Ice cores drilled nearby by international teams through the 1990s showed that the ice at that depth was over 400,000 years old, meaning the lake beneath it had been sealed away from the atmosphere for far longer than that. Geological evidence places the isolation between 15 and 25 million years, longer than modern humans have existed as a species. In February 2012, after decades of drilling, a Russian research team, led by Valery Lukin of the Arctic and Antarctic Research Institute, finally reached the lake's surface, at a depth of nearly 3,800 meters. Water rose up the borehole. Samples were collected. Inside them, bacteria. Genetic sequencing, published by microbiologist Scott Rogers of Bowling Green State University, identified thousands of distinct genetic sequences. Some matched organisms known from hydrothermal vents and extreme salt lakes. Roughly a third matched nothing in any existing genetic database. The findings were disputed. Contamination from the drilling process was raised as a serious concern. Rogers's team defended their methodology. The debate continues today. What isn't disputed is the environment itself. Water pressure at the lake's surface, roughly 350 atmospheres. Near freezing temperatures. Complete darkness. Complete isolation for at least 15 million years. If life exists down there, and the evidence strongly suggests something does, it has been evolving on its own, completely alone, for longer than the primate order has existed. Whatever is down there has not seen sunlight since before humans, chimpanzees, or any of our closest relatives existed as separate species. Russian drilling operations have continued in the years since 2012, with researchers sampling only the water that rises up the borehole rather than physically entering the lake, to minimize contamination risk. Whatever has been running its own evolutionary experiment down there for 15 million years, with no sunlight and no competition of any kind, nobody yet knows what it has become. 10 places. A lake in Canada that never repeats its own pattern. A fire in the desert that was supposed to burn for a few weeks, and is still burning 54 years later. A circle in the Sahara so precise, it's used as a landmark from orbit. Hundreds of new desert drawings, found by artificial intelligence, in a place studied for a century. A cave sealed for 5.5 million years, running entirely on chemistry instead of sunlight. An island where a third of the plant life exists nowhere else on Earth. A glacier that bleeds instead of melts. A lake that turns living animals to stone. A river that boils with no volcano in sight. And beneath 4 kilometers of Antarctic ice, a lake that hasn't seen light since before our species existed. Every one of these places has been studied, measured, published, peer-reviewed, and every single one has, at some point, forced a working scientist to put their name on a paper that ends with 3 words. Science isn't supposed to be comfortable saying. We do not know. The world isn't fully mapped. It isn't fully understood, and somewhere, in the gap between what we can measure and what we can prove, there's a fire that refuses to stop burning, and a lake that's older than us.